KIDO Talk Radio. She always makes us smile. Our great friend Heidi Harris, HeidiHarris.com, live from Las Vegas. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Always great to talk to you.
You know, we were just talking moments ago off the air. I'd love to replay that conversation where you go, "Hey, baby," and I said, if I said that to you, there'd be issues.
You can't even say you look nice today anymore without winding up having a conversation in HR. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous. I read these stories about these women who will say somebody made an unwanted sexual advance. So what does that mean? He stuck his hand down your shirt, or he just said, you want to go have coffee? I don't know what it means anymore.
I don't know what it means either. It is a crazy world, as we've talked about before. Have we gotten too PC? We've had these women's marches and such. As a conservative, as a social conservative, your thoughts on the women's movement?
Oh, brother, I'm doing a podcast now, which I post on HeidiHarris.com, shameless plug. And I talked about the Women's March because they had the big one here in Las Vegas. I'm not sure what they want, Kevin. I really don't know. Were they marching for the right to vote, drive, marry who they want to, get an education? I'm not really sure what they think they're not getting in America. And beyond that, I'm not sure what rights they thought they lost since Donald Trump took office. I'm very confused.
I think we all are. And you take a look at what Donald Trump has done. The economy is rolling, and we'll cover that coming up. But first, let's go back to Facebook. They keep changing their algorithm. They keep changing everything. How powerful do you believe that Facebook has become?
You know what I think is interesting about Facebook is that now, as you know, some of the people who actually created Facebook, even the guy who came out with a like button, what would we do without the like button, right? How would we get our affirmation in the world? Even those people are saying that Facebook was created to absorb as much of your time as possible, and they think it's a threat to democracy. And here's what I would say. I would say, of course the left is saying that. Remember, these guys are lefties, okay? And what do lefties believe? Lefties believe if you create a perfect environment, everyone will behave. If we just take the guns away, everyone will be nice. If everybody has a house, everybody will be nice. If everybody has this and that. So it's interesting to me that Facebook really thinks they have the power to control human behavior, when the reality is all Facebook's done is pull back the curtain on how people really are.
Indeed. Of course, when you're a conservative, it's a little different being on Facebook than when you're a progressive.
Well, that may be true. I think there's a lot of nastiness on Facebook. I'm sure you suffered from some of that nastiness. I have too. But you know what's interesting? Like, let's say you're in traffic. I don't know about you. Maybe you're nicer than I am. But if you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off, what are you going to do? You're going to be cussing and calling them all kinds of names in your car, right? You're not going to roll the window down and do any of that, right?
Right.
You're just going to cuss and yell, you jerk, da, 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 from the confines and the safety and the relative anonymity of your car. But if you had to get out of the car and have a conversation with the person, you probably wouldn't say any of that, right? So Facebook allows people with fake profiles and anonymity, same with Twitter, to just come out and be who they really are. So it's not the social media platform's fault that people are who they are.
Well, everybody seems to be a tough guy in your car, tough guy on Facebook, and you're thinking to yourself, but if you really have to have a confrontation with someone, it's very different than being online. I guess they call those the trolls or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they back down in a heartbeat if you go after them. I actually had a guy, when I left my former company, email me, and he said, well, I shouldn't have to suffer from hatred and intolerance because of who I love. And I said, what world do you live in where you're guaranteed everyone agrees with your choices, whether they're sexual choices or your clothing choices or your music choices or what you drive, what you eat? I mean, come on. Nobody's entitled to live in a world where nobody disagrees with you. It's shocking that people are such wusses anymore.
Yes. I think somebody wrote a book on that, The Wussification of America or something of that nature.
Absolutely. People are babies. Think of it this way, Kevin. When's the last time you saw a kid with a skinned knee? Seriously.
Yeah, trying to think.
Right? They're not allowed to. Here in Las Vegas, we have those monkey bars and whatnot out in these public parks. They're covered with a canopy, and the little babies land in a little piece of foam. When I was a kid, I was out there in 110-degree weather. The monkey bars were hotter than that. You burn your hands, you drop to the ground, you grab a bunch of sand, you get back on the monkey bars. For heaven's sake, kids, nowadays we're raising a bunch of wimps. We really are.
Well, and people actually would go outside and they would play as opposed to the virtual stuff that we live in today.
Yeah, I don't know how it goes in Idaho, but I know there are a lot of places in the world where kids used to make extra money in the wintertime offering to shovel the neighbor's driveway. I don't know how many kids knock on your door and offer to do that anymore. I don't remember the last time I ever had a kid knock on my door and say, hey, I'll mow your lawn, for $10 or $20. I mean, kids used to actually do that. Now they sleep in till Saturday, noon on Saturday morning and don't do anything.
Boy, we're sounding like those guys on the Muppet Show up in the alley, don't we? Aren't we?
Yeah, you kids get off my lawn. I know.
Our great friend Heidi Harris joining us from Las Vegas, HeidiHarris.com. So let's talk a little bit about your podcast and your book. I'm always excited about your projects, and wherever we are, I always go, Heidi, how do you do this? How do you do that? You're doing things, and I'm just following you. So if people want to hear some provocative thoughts, some conservative commentary, what can they do?
They can subscribe to my podcast on iTunes. It's Heidi Harris Show. That's the podcast. And if they forget all that, they can just find all that at HeidiHarris.com. And they can subscribe there, and I keep up with social media. I talk about things I actually care about. I got to be honest with you, Kevin, after leaving commercial radio after 19 years, I don't really miss it. So now when I do a podcast, I focus on something that I actually think is interesting, like this Facebook situation. Facebook, the most recent one I did, or it's going to be shown up on Friday. I'll put it up on Friday. Facebook is now being sued because there's a guy. Remember the guy about a year ago who said, I'm going to kill somebody, and then he went out and he killed an elderly man, and he did it all on Facebook Live. Do you remember that story?
I do.
Well, now Facebook is being sued by the estate of this poor elderly man. I felt terrible for him. It was awful. But Facebook, they're saying, should have known. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who put a lot of nasty stuff on Facebook, racist, anti-Semitic, whatnot, and they threaten all kinds of things. And even if this guy had said, I'm going to go kill this man on this corner at this time, I don't know how you could hold Facebook responsible. I mean, there are 2 billion people on Facebook, and you simply can't hold them responsible for everything people put online that they may or may not actually carry out.
Heidi Harris joining us here. Well, I mean, look, we don't want to go through any conflict anymore. You just mentioned it. We don't want to get our knees skinned. We don't want to, have anybody question who we love and any of those things. We want everything guaranteed. And then when it doesn't happen, we wonder what the heck happened.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's pretty sad. And what's interesting, and I do mention it in my book, which is coming out here in a couple of weeks. The book's called Don't Pat Me on the Head. And one of the things I do mention in the book is that this emailer that I referenced who said, well, I shouldn't have to suffer hatred because of who I love. What's scary about him, Kevin, is this guy probably represents the demo that advertisers are going to go after. And this guy is the one they don't want to have their assumptions challenged. They don't want their lifestyle ever challenged. They want everybody to agree with everything. And advertisers are going to continue to kowtow to them, which I believe will cost more people their jobs if they stand up for what's right, because this generation of wusses is coming up, and it's pretty sad.
Our great friend Heidi Harris joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning here at KIDO Talk Radio. And then you have the anti-wuss, which is the president.
Don't you love it? You know what, Kevin? When's the last time? Because I don't remember. Maybe you do. The last time there was a government shutdown and the Republicans didn't get blamed for yanking food out of people's mouths, for taking medicine away from old people and children. You know the whole drill, right?
Yeah.
This is the first time in my memory that the Democrats have taken the blame. They called it the Schumer shutdown, as you know, and they threw it right back on them. And finally, I guess Mitch McConnell found his parts. I don't know. Maybe having Trump as president helped him a little bit. But, Mitch McConnell used to back down. Paul Ryan used to back down. They never stood up against the Democrats. And this time they turned it on them. And at least the perception publicly for most people was that Schumer was responsible. Now, we know there's blame on both sides, obviously. But it's nice to see the Republicans fight back for once and give the Democrats what they've been giving the Republicans for decades.
Heidi, let's go back to this. Again, they follow the same old playbook. And it all comes down to the DACAs and the Dreamers. And this immigration bill has been going on for quite some time. You've been at the forefront of this. And really, do you reward people for breaking the law? And they say, oh, we promise we're not going to bring anybody more in. And yet our borders continue to be flooded.
Well, that's what Reagan said, right? This is what happened in 1986 with Ronald Reagan. That, well, after this, we're going to, tighten up pull up the rope kind of thing, and nobody else is going to come in. And, of course, that's what always happens. And what's the lesson that people learn? Keep sneaking your kids in, and we'll find some way to fake the documents to make it sound like they've been here for 10 years or whatever. It's a tough situation, and I don't say that I have a perfect answer. I really don't. If you got brought to the United States and you're 3 or 5 years old and you've gone to school in America and you speak English and you have been here all these years, what do? Send them back to, Canada? Well, of course in Canada they'd speak English, but Canada, Guatemala, wherever. Is that what you do? I don't know if that's the answer. But the problem is these kids are kept in limbo because of their parents. That's the problem. It's not Donald Trump's fault they're in limbo. Their parents took a chance, and unfortunately, it's kept their kids in a mess.
What do you make of where we are with the left? We've had 8 years of President Obama. President Trump seems to be under siege. He seems to be enjoying it. But, culturally, where are we in our society today?
Well, I think it's scary how fast we're going downhill. As you know, my situation when I left commercial radio, I got canned because I actually spoke out and said that kids need a mom and a dad. That's all they need is a mom and a dad. And for that, I got tossed out of commercial radio as a conservative. And 10 years ago, that wasn't controversial. 5 years ago, that wasn't controversial. And now as a society, everybody wants to make everything okay. And if you say something they don't like, going back to the whiners, they complain about it. And, I'll give you a funny example. It's not funny, but it's the true example. I happened to go to a pet store one day, and there was a dog in a car, and it was like 100 and something outside. And so it was like a PetSmart or whatever where the doors open and close all the time. So I'm standing in the parking lot next to this car going, whose dog is this? Finally, the guy came out, and he started, I got in his face, of course, and then he was, getting defensive and whatnot. And then some girl out of nowhere walking across the parking lot, looking about half out of it, said to me, why are you giving him a hard time? And that is so indicative of the way society is now, right? It's better to allow evil to continue than to make the person perpetrating the evil feel bad. We don't want to call him on what he's doing, I see. So I should just ignore the dog in a car when it's probably 140 inside the car. I should ignore that because I don't want to make the guy feel bad. So that is something that's pretty recent, and it's pretty sad.
Indeed. Our great friend Heidi Harris with us, Kevin Miller in the morning here at KIDO Talk Radio. It's just that no one wants to be uncomfortable anymore.
Right. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, and no one wants to be called on their stuff, and what's right is wrong, and what's wrong is right, and it's just nuts. I mean, I had put a thing on my Facebook page the other day about the Women's March, and I was joking about these. I said these ladies, da-da-da-da-da, because they're walking around with female body parts on their heads, right? These aren't ladies. These aren't suffragettes, okay? These are women who are carrying signs that say things I can't even repeat on the air. So one of my Facebook friends said to me, oh, well, I'm offended that you did it. Oh, I'm sorry. You're offended? Well, let me change what I said. I mean, come on. I'm offended by them wearing women's body parts on their heads. Come on.
I think you've given all of us the visual.
You've seen them. I've seen some really cruel. Come on. What is your point? What are you mad about now? And then, of course, I was putting cartoons on. There was one very funny cartoon I saw where you saw the women at the Women's March, and then over the head was a plane flying, with a little message behind the plane, and it said, where's my dinner?
More with Heidi Harris next here at KIDO Talk Radio. And Kevin Miller in the morning, our great friend Heidi Harris joining us once again to give us the Western perspective from Las Vegas, HeidiHarris.com, if you want to check out her podcast and stuff. You're always very honest when we have you on here. You are such an institution in conservative talk radio as a young lady, as a female. Do you miss it?
No, I don't miss it at all. Honestly, I got to tell you, Kevin, I haven't missed it at all. And I don't want to denigrate talk radio because I had a great 19-year career there, and I loved it. And I know that you're doing amazing things up there in Idaho, and that's how it should be. Talk radio was supposed to be the last bastion of free speech. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stand up for your community like you do every single day. Unfortunately, talk radio has become the land of people doing the Drudge Report. And if you're going to do that, why do I even need to have a local host, right? Unfortunately. So I'm not bitter about it. I'm glad that I left, and I'm enjoying not doing it anymore. But, there's still a lot of life in talk radio when it comes to people like you who are doing it correctly. But if it's going to be plug and play Drudge Report, no point in that at all.
Right, but I mean, again, and you talked about it last segment, I don't want to make it uncomfortable, but, CBS, your former employer, one that I worked for as well, and they really didn't have good things to say about me. They gave me an opportunity. It didn't work out. You were released because of something you put on Facebook, not something you said on the air. And, I mean, as a talk show host, it's all about the First Amendment, and you are a lot more opinionated than I am. Where is the future there? And I just wanted to let the audience in on that, and I hope you're okay with that.
Oh, I'm absolutely okay with that. I got tossed because I put something online on Facebook and here's what happened. There was an ad that was running for Clark County Family Services, which is our county where Las Vegas is. And they kept running this ad, online, and there were two guys with a little baby, two men with a baby, and it was all about adoption and this kind of thing, okay? So I got tired of seeing that ad, and clearly they're trying to normalize the situation. So I got vocal. I put something on my Facebook page, and I said, this is not a normal situation, even if it's normal for you. In other words, I know people who've always felt gay. I'm not going to argue with that. That's their life. But I said it's not normal for a child, and especially a baby has a better shot at getting a two-parent home as a foster child, okay? So I made a point of that, and, of course, everybody went after me, which is fine. Every Freddie Mercury wannabe in a tank top on his profile shot went after me for 500 miles around. I'm a big girl. I can take it. Things they said to me that I could not even say on the air. And I thought, ooh, I wouldn't even adopt a puppy to you. You want children and you talk like that to me? Mm-hmm. Anyway, the point is children need a mom and a dad. That's the point I made. And by the way, I have made that point when it comes to single mothers who purposely have children without fathers. And I understand that circumstances happen and there are people who are widowed and whatnot. But when you purposely, and I know people who've done this, have a child because you're running out of time or you want to do it on your own or whatever, and there's no father around for that child, to me that's criminal. And I've said that, and I've had women say to me, oh, kids don't need a dad. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I had a great dad. Ask your kids if they'd like to have a dad. It's ridiculous to say. Now, I'm not picking on single parents. Of course, single parents can be fantastic, and many of them do an amazing job. I don't know how they do it. Nobody's arguing that you can't be gay and be a parent or be single and be a parent. I've never argued that. But even Elton John came out and said that someday he's going to have to explain to his father or his child who came out of they did a surrogate, that he has no mother. So kids need a mom and a dad. What they need is the unique contribution that males and females bring to the situation. Now, can straight people be bad parents? Yeah, most kids in foster care are there because of straight people. Let's be honest, right? But kids need a mom and a dad. In an ideal world, that's the point that I made. Ideally, a child would have a mom and a dad. But, of course, people in their subjectivity got upset about it and said, it's horrible things and whatnot. And, they're allowed to, but they pressured my advertisers and my company caved. Now, it's not a free speech issue, believe it or not, because only government has the obligation to protect your free speech. You don't have free speech at work. And you've seen the stories I have too. People who, let's say, for example, were at a white supremacist rally on Friday night, right? And the company finds out about it and you get fired. Well, that's because the company doesn't want a racist on staff. Can you imagine if a company had to keep somebody who was a racist and you're a person of color and you're working in the next cubicle and they were at a white supremacist rally on Friday night? So I told my listeners, I said, listen, and I never bash my employers. I told my listeners, I said, listen, you cheered when Kathy Griffin got canned from CNN because of the Trump head controversy. I said, so, you were all about that. And when I got fired, you were upset. Well, understand, my employer, whether you agree or not with what they did, they have the right to do that. And that's the point that I made.
Traffic and weather together. And back with our great friend Heidi Harris, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. I agree with you on that, but it's very different. Your thoughts on the First Amendment, very different than what we have with the NFL.
The NFL. Oh, geez, Louise. Isn't it interesting how their ratings are so far? I haven't watched a game in 2 years. I don't watch it, and I love football. You got to understand, I love the game, but I'm so offended by these overpaid millionaires who just throw a football around, protesting. They wouldn't have the kind of lifestyle or the kind of salary anywhere else in the world that they get here in America. And if you've got a problem with police or whatever it might be, the government, fine. Protest on your off time. But don't take my time as a fan to do that and throw it in my face. I think that's reprehensible.
Again, and I've seen this. I've seen this with many of my friends, you included, in my own way. I think a lot of listeners don't know that there are people that are looking to get conservative talk show hosts. We saw it with our friend Sean Hannity. You've known Sean for years, where people were trying to get him kicked off the air. We saw that with some other conservative folks, but Sean went public on it.
Well, because Sean isn't doing it. These other guys, I don't know what they were sending pictures of their body parts to women for. I have no idea
Right.
what was going on, but clearly there was an investigation, and, some of these folks, one of the guys was having an affair on Fox with a person I happen to know. We won't get into that. But, yeah, clearly there was nothing that would stick with Sean Hannity. I've known Sean a long time, and I don't, obviously, anybody can be doing something you don't know about, but I doubt he's that dumb. You know what's interesting? I had a conversation recently with a very wealthy guy, and somehow we were talking about, he's a business owner, we're talking about cheating or something, and I said, well, I could never do it. I couldn't live with myself. And he made such an important point to me, Kevin. He said, oh, I can live with myself. He said, I just don't want to be in a situation where I could be blackmailed. And see, that's the issue. And I'm not speaking for Sean or any of those people, but I'm saying if you're really smart, you have to understand that anything you do, whether or not you think it's okay, could put you in a situation to be blackmailed. And I've known Sean a long time. He's a family values kind of guy. And when they tried to go after him, there was no there. That's why it got dropped so fast.
Indeed. Of course, people will make these allegations against him. And that's the tough part, trying to reclaim your name when you have these groups, whether it's Media Matters or others or CARE or what have you, make these false allegations to scare away the listeners and the advertisers.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but I think in Sean's case, it disappeared pretty quickly. I think if there's nothing there, if there's no fire, then it disappears. Of course, they'll try to throw something at you. You know what's sad about it is that some of these women cry wolf, and when they do that, they cause problems for everybody else. Because there are women who legitimately have been sexually harassed, have sex with me or you're fired type of thing. And when that happens, of course, these executives shouldn't be around. But there are also women who need to, buck up and be able to stand up to a guy who hits on them in the building or whatever, in a nice way. You can handle it nicely, but, somewhere in the middle is the truth. The wussy women who can't handle anything versus the women who are, hit on and don't have options. Let's say you're a single mom trying to support your family and somebody says you got to sleep with me or I'm firing you. I mean, that's a horrible situation for a woman to be in. And certainly that's very legitimate. But, I will say, Kevin, that women have cheapened our brand. And when you look at people like Harvey Weinstein, why did he hit on these women? Because he knew that if you didn't do it, somebody else would. So we have trained men to think that, first date, hookup app, we're good.
Heidi Harris joining us from HeidiHarris.com. Kevin Miller in the morning. Don't forget our great State of the Union watch party at Dave & Buster's. More details at KIDOTalkRadio.com. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good. Kevin Miller in the morning, our great friend Heidi Harris, HeidiHarris.com with us on KIDO Talk Radio. So what do you make of the whole Mueller investigation? And then we'll get into the latest from the FBI and deleted texts and such. But, is this much ado about nothing?
Well, I think that, they've been looking into allegations with Donald Trump and Russia for long before he was the president. So 18 months, maybe? And they've got nothing. If there was something there, they would have found it by now. But then you hear about these texts that are going on. Everybody knew it was biased toward Hillary. Everyone knew that, right? Is anybody surprised?
Well, just, and again, Heidi, you've been on these big shows. And you know how the producers will kind of sway things. And, you get out and you have a life. But, Sunday mornings after I go to church, I come back and I watch the shows. And just how they position everything. As we've said, Donald Trump could become Superman, save the world, give everybody billions of dollars, and they'd still say that he was a bad person. Just the way they position things and just the power of the press to influence the process.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's tough to find objective news on Donald Trump. For example, even Weekly Standard, which was obviously Jeb. They were like Jeb, the establishment. Even they don't even put anything out that's objective about him. It's very difficult. He's not the worst thing. He's not the best thing. He's not always right. He's not always wrong. And it's very, very tough. Fox slobbers all over him for the most part. CNN and MSNBC can't stand him. So it is very difficult to actually get some actual news about him. And when you look at what happened with the shutdown and him being able to back them down, if Trump had backed down and the Democrats had won with this shutdown, they would be all over the place doing victory laps. But instead, it got real quiet. And what's fascinating is what Donald Trump did and his administration is beyond just backing the Democrats down this one time. I know he hasn't won the war, but it's a good skirmish. But here's the thing. He's gotten the Democrats to turn on each other. There's so many powerful Democrats who are going after Chuck Schumer and calling him a wuss. And usually the Republicans are the ones dealing with that. That is huge. And, of course, MSNBC is never going to mention that. CNN is never going to mention that. they tried to make it sound in Alabama, for example, as if the loss of Roy Moore was Donald Trump's. Donald Trump never backed Roy Moore, not until he was the last candidate. Donald Trump told him that Luther Strange was a better candidate, and yet they still tried to pin that on Trump as a loss for the Trump administration. It's ludicrous.
Well, it is. And then you've got the FBI agent, you've got the attorney, they're doing these texts, and now all of a sudden they seem to have lost 5 months of texts, and, they're blaming it on Samsung. Look, you talk to, and look, you've had the insight with these guys that have won wars and everything else. You just don't lose texts at the highest levels.
No, you don't lose text at the highest level. What was it, 90,000? Is that how many texts these two sent back and forth to each other, something like that?
Crazy indeed.
You ever get any work done? You just text all day long. Yeah, it is crazy. And anybody in government knows you have to be very careful what you put on a government phone. I mean, certainly I have friends in government. You do too. And if I'm going to ask them a question that might not be for public consumption, I'm not going to text it to them on their work phone. I just know better than that. And so they should. And certainly it's just, the whole thing's just laughable. But they have not been able to make any of this Russia stuff stick with Donald Trump at this point. And they are desperate to do that. And what's frustrating to me is you still have people on the right like Jeff Flake, and he was almost giving Trump some credit this week with the shutdown, almost. But even, Jeff Flake is so disgusted and constantly criticizing Donald Trump. Listen, he may not have been your first choice, and you and I have both had bosses over the course of our careers where that wasn't my first choice of a boss. But you know what? You still get in the boat and row.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
You still have your responsibility to make the best show you can make, to make the best product you can make, to make the best car you can make, whatever that particular occupation is that you have, regardless of whether you like the captain of the ship, you still have a responsibility to try to make things better. And folks like Jeff Flake, I mean, they're just casualties on the road to life. They really are. They're not standing up for what's right, and they're not willing to stay in the fight and try to battle for what's right.
Finally, a semi-local story for you. The Bundys have been released. Ammon Bundy returning to Idaho, Cliven Bundy to Nevada. You covered that story from Las Vegas for years. Your takeaway and the takeaway from the locals there.
Well, I think it's pretty sad that they kept some of these guys in jail for up to 4 years, and ultimately the charges were dropped. And I don't think they're right. I know that you had interviewed them and you've been out there to Bunkerville and that kind of thing, and you followed this very closely also. I don't think what they did was right at all, but I also don't think what the government did was right. Where was their right to a speedy trial? Keeping people who had been law-abiding all their lives in jail for almost 4 years and then dropping the charges because the prosecution didn't release what they were supposed to release, hiding things from the defense. I mean, it's reprehensible. It really is. The government screwed this up, and they spent far more money. They spent more money, from what I understand, just rounding up the cattle than Clive ever owed the government. I mean, they tried to make a point, and the point they made was the government's incompetent. That's what they did.
Yeah, what was it like locally at the time covering that story every day?
Well, I think that there were a lot of people who got mad at me because I wasn't on the Bundy train. And I said, wait a minute, these guys aren't paying their bills. Yes, government owns too much of Nevada. I get that. And that is true. But you still have to pay your bills. And if you don't like the rules, whatever the rules may be, then you fight to change them. That's what we do. You go to court, which he did. Then you appeal. Then he did that, and he lost that. And, there are times in life, if all these things fail, you got to give it to God. But the problem is, if Bundy ever kicks the bucket, the government's just going to take all of his stuff. He's still going to lose it all. His kids will lose it all. So what point has he made? I don't think that he's made a point and changed anything. And the people who would support him are doing a victory dance, of course, but I wouldn't be so quick to do that.
The scary part about this is, like you said, Heidi, they put them in jail, no bail, kept them 2 years from their families. You read about this happening, and it sends a chill to everybody else, not only wanting to get involved in activism, but possibly covering these stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do agree that what they did was wrong, but I think that the government botched this. If they're going to do all of this, put these guys in jail, try to make this point, and who was the one guy who got, I don't have his name in front of me, who got 62 years or something like that, and that'll probably be appealed. He'll probably be let go because if the prosecution wasn't giving the other folks the information, they probably didn't give it for this trial. So the prosecution just looked stupid. I mean, were you trying to make a point about interfering with the government? Now, one of the things that didn't come out was the fact that there were people who showed up there who had children there, kids possibly in the line of fire. And that's ridiculous, using children as human shields. So I do not agree with what the Bundys did. I do not agree with people coming out for 100 miles around with a horse and a gun, aiming it at the government to try to make some point because they don't like government. I don't agree with what any of them did. But government does have a responsibility to try people fairly and quickly and put out the evidence that they need to put out. Of course, in Oregon, as you know, there were no convictions, and Lavoy Finnegan got killed as a result of what happened, and that standoff went on for 41 days. I mean, if I'd been in charge in Oregon with what they did at the wildlife refuge, I'm going to tell you something right now. I'd have put a siege around the place. Nothing goes in, no toilet paper, no Slim Jims, no beer, nothing, and nothing comes out, and in 3 days they'd have been out of there. But instead, the government sat around for 41 days and allowed them to be resupplied. I mean, how ludicrous was that?
I got to tell you, having been to both places, Oregon makes Bunkerville look like Times Square.
Oh, Bunkerville.
That was my takeaway from that one. I mean, you talk about out in the middle of nowhere. Oh.
That's funny. Well, you know what? Listen, everybody's entitled to a fair trial, and if the prosecution is going to play games, and whether it's, I don't know that it was necessarily, the judge called it misconduct. Okay, I'm not sure if it was intentional misconduct. I'm not defending the government here. I'm just saying. I don't know if it was intentional or they just screwed it up. But you're just not allowed to withhold some of that information, and the government just botched it terribly, and it makes the government look awful.
Heidi Harris, we've got about a minute left. What are we looking forward to in the next few months here from a national perspective?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the DACA negotiations. Trump's obviously working very hard to try to come up with some kind of solution. I don't know that the solution is going to make either side happy, but I think, and I can't say it enough, this was a huge victory for Trump to beat the Democrats down. And now they're put on notice that next time there's a shutdown, the Democrats are going to be blamed for this. And this is fantastic. This is why people voted for Trump, because if Jeb Bush had been president, he would have taken it lying down like every Republican president has. Oh, they take all the blame for these shutdowns. And it was nice to see Trump and Mitch McConnell finally, bucking up a little bit, but having Trump back him and say, you know what, this is the Democrats' fault. So this is going to be a game changer, I believe. It's not the war. I know it's just a skirmish, but I think it has changed the game. When these people are back on their heels on the Democrat side and having to defend themselves, nice to see for a change.
Heidi Harris, HeidiHarris.com. We thank you, ma'am.
I always love talking to you. You are doing an amazing thing for your community, and you really are the best at talk radios. I'm not just saying that to suck up. I truly mean it.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm just trying to justify my existence. Heidi, thank you very much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. KIDO Talk Radio, Kevin Miller in the morning. Joining us now from St. Luke's, our great friend, nutritionist, a woman who has really, how should I say this, worked to declutter my brain when it comes to my numerous questions about nutrition, and will do so for you. Caroline Messerschmidt joining us from St. Luke's. Caroline, good morning.
Good morning, Kevin.
It's so confusing this time of year when it comes to losing weight. What are some of the key factors? Is it really what you take in? Does that make a big difference?
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. We know that 80% of weight loss is diet related, the other 20% exercise. If you think about losing about a pound a week, you've got to burn 500 calories each day to lose that. And it's really challenging to do that with just exercise alone. So diet plays a huge part in that.
What are some basic rules? What are some good foods? Because, again, we're inundated with commercials and experts and pseudo-experts. Is there anything simple that we could follow?
Yeah, so My Plate is one of kind of where I like to start with patients because it is very simple and it gets at the heart of why or how we can fill our stomachs in a healthy way and also keep ourselves satisfied for the long term. It is, if you think about a plate and dividing it in half, and half of it filling it with fruits and vegetables, filling a quarter of it with some sort of protein, so that might be meat or beans, and then filling the other quarter with grains. What that does is, like I said, it keeps us satisfied because it increases our fiber intake. So we're taking in a lot more fruits and vegetables, which have more fiber in them and which are naturally lower in calorie than our grains and our proteins. So it helps with both filling our stomachs and keeping us full for longer on fewer calories.
Well, what are some good fibers?
Yeah, so any fruit or vegetable, I know you mentioned kind of what are good foods. I really like people to get out of that mindset of good foods, bad foods, because really when we set ourselves up for that, we think, oh my gosh, there's no way I can never have a piece of cake or I can never eat this food. So basically any fruit or vegetable, I know there's hundreds of diets out there that say you can't eat this fruit or you can't eat this vegetable because it has, it's higher calorie. But really any fruit or vegetable are great sources of fiber. Other sources of fiber are things like our beans, nuts, seeds, and then whole grain breads also give us fiber.
Well, I mean, if it's not good foods and bad foods, how would we look at those things? A lot of us, and Caroline, you and I have worked together.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sit there and I can be rigid for like 2 or 3 months, and then, for lack of a better term, I get off the wagon and it's Katie bar the door.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so it's thinking about what are those foods that are going to give me energy for the long term. So what are those foods that are going to stay with me longer? So for instance, if we have a donut for breakfast, that stays with us maybe for 10, 15 minutes, and then we're ready for the second donut or we're ready to have lunch, versus having something like oatmeal with maybe we mix in some peanut butter or we have some almonds in it, and then maybe we have something like a banana with it, where we're really getting that combination of protein, whole grains, and some fiber to sustain us throughout the morning.
What about the idea of carbs? Some people love the carbs. Some people vilify the carbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in general, the American diet, we eat a lot of carbs. That's what we fill up on. So it's not necessarily that carbs are bad. It's just that we choose those as space fillers. We say, I'm hungry, I need a snack, and we gravitate towards maybe crackers or chips or cookies, something that is a high-carb food, versus gravitating towards something like carrots or celery, or having maybe adding in some nuts to those to that snack. And that's why carbs burn really quickly in our system and don't keep us full for very long. And that's why we need that good combination of having, I always say for a snack, having some produce and then having some protein along with it, so that we're not just eating carbs.
Caroline Messerschmidt joining us, a nutritionist from St. Luke's, here with Kevin Miller in the morning at KIDO Talk Radio. So we've heard a lot about the carbs and the protein. What about fats? We always hear about fats, and I've heard that there are some good fats.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very true. There are. We always think when we're trying to lose weight that we should cut fats out. That's been historically what people have done. And in actuality, fats are what give us that staying power. So, many of the listeners probably have experienced trying to eat healthy, and you get a giant salad and you say, okay, I'm not going to put any fats on it. I'm not going to put any cheese or any dressing. And then you're hungry a few hours, pretty quickly after eating that giant salad. And that's because you cut out the fat. And the fat's what keeps it, slows down our digestion. And so definitely having some fat in our diet is important. And those healthy fats, they come from our plant sources of fats. So we're looking at things like nuts and seeds. Once again, they offer fiber and they also offer healthy fats. Other things is avocado, things like olive oil, and fat that's in fish. Those are all those healthy fats that really we know are beneficial because they keep us from eating some of the carbohydrates, and they also keep us full for longer.
Caroline, we really appreciate you, and I always thank you for taking time for us here, either in person at St. Luke's or at KIDO Talk Radio.
You're very...
Wishing you all, you and your family, good day, God bless, and no matter what, keep the faith.